Make a choice to begin anywhere in your life, and the next chapter of your journey has begun. And along the way, be open to being inspired. Listen to the conversations led by Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, Howard University Interim President, President Emeritus, and Charles R. Drew, Professor of Surgery, on The Journey.
Welcome to The Journey. I'm Dr. Wayne A.I. Frederick, Interim President and President Emeritus of Howard University. Artists have always played a vital role in shaping culture, documenting history, and imagining new futures. Across generations and across the African diaspora, artists served as both a mirror and a movement, reflecting lived experience while inspiring social change. At Howard University, we view artists as global citizens, creators whose work transcends borders, connects communities, and carries cultural responsibility. Through the Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts, we prepare students to engage the world thoughtfully, creatively, and with purpose. Today I'm joined by Dr. Raquel Monroe, Dean of the Chadwick A. Boseman College of Fine Arts, and Professor James Phillips. Together we'll explore how arts inform social cultural engagement, how Howard has shaped the Black arts movement, and how the university continues to influence the future of diasporic artistic expression. So let's begin the conversation. So Professor Phillips, I have to start with you. When we talk about the Black arts movement and how social engagement is such a critical part of that expression of artists, what does that mean to you, and how does that translate into how you try to guide your students?
Well, first thing I would say, gives me a job to do, because the artists, if they're not the person that comes with the idea, they take the idea, the concept, and they have to develop it into something seeable, an image. And that way it becomes concrete. And that way the idea can move forward, because it's got something for it to like be stabilized, the movement or the time frame.
Let's talk about the image, because I think one of the areas that I would say sometimes struggle with when we talk about these things is that imagery is so different based on your lived experience. And oftentimes that art can be very personal. But as part of a bigger movement, how do artists, or how do you work with artists or try to get artists to recognize that their personal expression may be part of a broader mosaic, and what types of things you encourage them to do in order to be able to make sure their art is representative of that broader expression?
Well, I think whatever the subject matter is, you have to do a certain amount of research into it, find out all the intricate parts, and look at it in a certain way where you can see certain angles that you can come up with fresh ways of presenting it without losing the essence of the concept. And I think that's where the creative mind comes into play.
And then, this is one of the few places that I've had this conversation where the word research comes up so often. I remember speaking to Felicia Rashad once, and she was talking about why it was important for students to do history, for our students to do history. And I guess that concept of researching an issue, especially in today's geopolitical environment, when I think of somebody, for instance, let's say somebody wanted to depict the imagery of the government going in and getting a president from a sovereign nation, right? There's so many layers to that conversation and that research. How welcoming are students to that idea of doing research so that they can get the essence of that story? How welcoming are they?
I would say it's kind of a mixed bag, because some people won't just jump into it, mainly because they like doing research, or maybe they like approach things from a historical perspective. And others will just take them a little while before they realize this is necessary for them to do in order to come up with something creative and keep up with the competitor.
Right. And Dean Monroe, I guess in this day and age, when we think of artists, we think of the number of opportunities they have using technology to get information, to probably dissect or get assistance with their creation, how do you still get them to tap into that most innate resource of their own creativity?
Ironically or surprisingly, particularly for makers, I'm finding that many of this generation are resistant to those technologies. They, when we were at Art Basel, for example, in Miami this past December, we had a large panel on AI, and the students were fired up. Like, we're not going to use that. We're not going to engage that. That's cheating. That's that. Even my own daughter's like, AI, and I'm like, you use Google, don't you? You realize that. So I was actually surprised because for makers in particular, of course, I don't think that students struggle as much when they're thinking about assistance with writing, but for a lot of the makers, I'm surprised by the louder resistant voices that I've experienced.
But let me explore that a little bit. You know, I went to the Netherlands this summer and went to a couple of museums, and two of the artists in particular were very digital focused. And I was fascinated by their work because I still saw a lot of their own creativity in terms of the expression, but also saw where they clearly used a lot of that assistance, as I'm describing it, to express themselves. Is it probably about one's likes and tastes, or are we entering a period where it's almost going to be part of a necessity, whether it's how you evaluate materials or colors, or how essential is it, I guess? And even though students may resist it, on the bigger creativity issue, is it probably necessary just to produce in today's world?
I don't think there's a way around it. Like I said, I think that a lot of students aren't necessarily cognizant of the way that they're already engaging with AI in particular in their making practices. And there is digital art. You know, I think where it gets interesting is when we start thinking about, are we using AI to generate scripts for playwriting? Are we using how do we engage digital technologies in the making of dances? Like, what does that look like? And in what capacity, how is that informing the making process? I think that's where it gets really interesting and tricky. And you have to have advanced technologies in order to be able to do that, particularly when you're thinking about moving bodies or live theater or anything that's time-based. How are you engaging with those technologies? Typically, they're going to have to be on the stage with you if you're doing time-based work, as opposed to if you're doing visual art, where you can see the direct influence in the product itself.
So I grew up in Trinidad and Tobago, and we're kind of approaching its carnival season. And a lot of that carnival expression came out of a way to express the voice of social change.
Right.
It's often rumored, documented, that part of the carnival was these 2 days off, that, as it were, that slaves would get, where they would use the old clothing from the slave owners, etc., and really be mimicking them. But in doing that, it offered entertainment for the slave masters, and that eventually evolved into an expression of political commentary, which today still exists on a much smaller scale, I would say. But every time I would say engage with it, I'm fascinated by how people use language or use posters or use artistry to describe certain things. It always draws me in. Today, when I look at protests across the country, I often get drawn into the posters that people have written, and some of them are very clever, but some of them represent art, art in some ways. I don't see people necessarily collecting a lot of that in order to tell stories about what was happening in a certain time. Where do you think that intersection is for people to appreciate that type of personal creative expression, but for us to recognize how much it represents part of what the political commentary was? And what role do you have, I would say, as the dean, to get students and to get all of us within the academia to recognize the important role that plays?
Well, to me, that speaks to the necessity of scholarship. because then you could look at historical movements like you're talking about and see where, for example, with HIV and AIDS, Make Art Stop AIDS, that was all largely, it was arts activism that pushed the movement to where that forced the government to pay attention. It was the Make Art Stop AIDS and die-ins, but it was those posters. Those are some of the most interesting posters that we have a historical record of in terms of arts and activism to look at that you can see. I think you can also look to the 60s and to the Black Arts Movement and also see the role of that type of visual art with posters in general. In fact, at was a museum in Chicago a few years ago at University of Chicago. I can't think of the museum itself, but they did a retrospective of specifically those protest posters.
Excellent.
Yeah. So, but I don't think that, I think that speaks to the necessity of having, in any type of arts program, for our students to be able to engage with history, engage with social political context, and understand the importance of crafting your message in such a way that it can fly under the radar if it needs to be, and those that know, or it can like hit you in the face, right? So, but like to be particular with the rhetoric and the significance of rhetoric, I think that's why they come to school.
Right. So, Professor Phillips, speaking of kind of the Black arts movement and arts leading that social change, maybe there was a particular era incident that really probably got you and really spoke to you in a way that made you want to continue along where you've taken your career. If so, what was that?
Well, I think it was growing up in the South, during the Jim Crow area. And my neighbors, of course, were white. And the elder of the family would always come around and try to buy us out so he could have his farm go all the way to the road. And once he found out that my mother was going to take me north to go to school because I was going to a segregated school, and we had secondhand books from the white school, secondhand buses, etc. And she decided I wasn't going to get a good education. So when he found out about that, he says to me, "Now you don't go up there north and get involved in all the nat changes now." So that was like inspiring. As a teenager, because I'm a rebel and do just the opposite.
Right.
So that was my first inroads into Black arts movement. But at that time, the Black arts movement hadn't happened yet. But once it happened, I was right in it.
Right. And when you think of the Black arts movement, I think for our listeners and viewers, what types of things you think of when you try to explain to students what it was like, who was critical in it, what it meant at that time in terms of empowering and giving an expression to the hopes and I would say even to the suffering of people?
Well, it was a fight the whole time because there were certain people, there were artists, that believed there's no such thing as Black art. And this dialogue continued for about at least 10 years, going back and forth. And it still exists today. One of the things happened when I was in New York. The Metropolitan Museum tried to do a Black artist show or a Negro art show. Mm-hmm. And they put out a call out for artists to bring, submit work. And then they decided that the work that they had collected from this artist call, it wasn't museum quality. Mm-hmm. So that set off a whole incidents of pickets and conferences and debates. And finally what they ended up doing, they did the show Harlem on My Mind, which was about Benazir's photos. Mm-hmm. Instead of a real full-fledged art show.
Fantastic. Mm-hmm. When I hear stories like this, and I wonder, as young people today study art history or study some of these movements, what would probably be some of the biggest things you would want them to walk away with if they were to study that era? Hear that story as you just told it. What would you want them to walk away understanding from that?
I like for them to walk away with the understanding that art can be universal, but it doesn't necessarily have to include Western art. You got the whole diaspora, and you can pull from any number of those countries that are part of the diaspora to create a universal image or a statement.
And with that in mind, obviously, you've now taken over the role of Dean of the Chadwick Boseman College of Fine Arts, and with that comes, I would say that sacred obligation to make sure that you carry some of that into the future. With that in mind, what are some of the things that you hope to see in the groundwork for the student who comes to Howard, to become an artist? What do you want to pour into them over that period of the time that they're here with us? Are they going to walk away understanding that history, but being able to express it in their own way?
One of the things that I think is important is for students to understand their role as an artist or an artist scholar or a scholar artist is that they are not only responding, but they are to the culture that they're inspiring and inciting the discourse as well. And it's important for them to know that the processes that inform their making or their thinking, their writing, their singing, their dancing, that process is important for them to be at every table. You know what I mean? Like, they have a responsibility, and they have the capacity, more importantly. They have the capacity because of the way that they think about moving through time and space or making things and producing things, to sit at all tables, to engage in conversations around the environment or poverty or food deserts, reproductive rights, any number of social political things that conversations that we're having. And I want them to walk away with that, knowing that my work, regardless of if it's arts for art's sake, for example, someone will say, I make stuff and it doesn't mean, I make the thing, I'm not trying to be political. But knowing that you can make a thing and you may not want it to be political, but depending on who sees it and where it's seen and when it's seen, someone may politicize it.
Right.
So just knowing that you put this thing into the universe, into the world, and it's going to speak to people differently, and you need to be able to speak about your work.
As we think of that history, Howard has always been at that intersection of that history. Who are some of the Howard historical figures you think over time that have contributed the most to this discussion?
Just strictly the black arts movement?
Yep.
Well, there's Stokely Carmichael, A.B. Spellman, Amir Baraka, Mary Lovelace O'Neill. And Africa became Jeff Donaldson and Wadsworth and Jarrell, and then eventually me. Houston Conwell and his wife. She's an arts administrator. There are more. I just can't.
Sure, that's a pretty valuable list right there. Okay. One of which I'll pull on. Stokely Carmichael and I happen to come from the same homeland, and interestingly enough, as a side note, he went to high school where my grandfather was the headmaster, actually. Okay. Interestingly, so I've heard a lot about him even before coming to Howard. But what do you think his contribution was in terms of that discussion of black arts and that movement? How do you think he contributed?
I think he was more of an idea person. Well, first of all, he came up with the slogan, which was interesting because the white people's slogan was 2, 4, 6, 8. We don't want to integrate. He came up with bang, bang, boom, boom, ungawa, black power. Right. So I thought that was that was a very good counter.
Absolutely, and very creative. What about Baraka?
He started, I guess you would call him a beat poet. And then he took the king's language, English, and turn it around and use it as a weapon against them. And a lot of times they use music as his metaphor to get his point across.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, just to switch gears a bit, the expression of young people today, when I look at art, and also when you look at just the art world in general, what art costs today, right? And I'll use maybe a Basquiat as an example. How much of that creativity you think is either blunted or promoted by kind of where the art world has gone in terms of the financial aspects of what we're seeing?
Yeah, but the visual art world is certainly, I feel, it's a little more challenging to step into than if we expand it to think about time-based work. So, and I also would say that if we look to the streets, right, like this is where hip hop comes in. If we look to the streets, we can see where, when folks were disenfranchised, they figured out how to create magic out of nothing. You know, so you're going to take art out of the schools. Well, we'll get spray cans and turn the whole city into our canvas. You know what I mean? Right. And then what happens? They take that and then they put that inside of the museums, and then that's costing a lot of money, right? Right. And so in the same way, when we're thinking about the role of the beat poets and the Black arts movement, and we can even go back to the New Negro movement and the Harlem Renaissance, and to think about the ways that those movements inform diaspora, like the Black Power movement in Brazil, the soul movement in Brazil, Fela Kuti in Nigeria, the work that he was doing, and how without internet, all of these discourses were informing one another. So now we have the internet, and we have Instagram, and we have the kids in Nigeria who are, I wish I could think of their names, who are creating dance moves Afrobeats move that we're now seeing that everyone around the world doing these moves, and you can go to that group and say, oh, West Side Lifestyles. We could see where they created the work. So I think it's a both and. I think that the extent to which things get sort of commodified or captured, because not everything turns into a commodity. That's because of the price can make it cost prohibitive for mass reproduction. Yep. But to the extent that that folks can, and it's good for artists, and when that happens in many ways, so we want artists to make that money. So there's a both and happening. There's that cost prohibitive, that only allows some people to enter the market, but is the artist getting paid? And then there's the art that's happening everywhere all the time, and the way that people are able to move the middleman out of the way, and social media allows them to deal directly with consumers, I feel is it's an important factor in where we are now.
I like your expression of that because, for a long time I would say I don't have an artistic bone in my body is what I would say. And then I remember once operating, and at the end of the surgery, closing the patient, going back up to my office, I just had a bit of an epiphany that what I had just done was my own expression in some way of art. I didn't take a picture of it. I didn't post it anywhere. But that period of time and what I was part of creating, and it interacts with me in a very different way. I will never see, that body of work, as it were, but I will always see the expression of it in the patient when they come to see me. And it's always a very personal thing when I see patients, and I think of that. I think that my hands were, part of creating this. So I've always thought about that from a different perspective. So with that in mind, as we wrap up and we think of canvases and studios and the practical things, that we do need. I'm going to ask both of you to respond to the same question. You first, Professor. We are very ambitious and very bullish about what we're going to do with the Chadwick Boseman College of Fine Arts. As we envision arts and communications complex and the buildings and the studios, what would you like to see in that space?
In most cases, we need spaces of more classrooms. We need more galleries. We need a gallery for students to exhibit their work. Also, bring in artists that let them have a space to have an exhibit that might be influential on the students' work. and also bring in professional artists from outside with an artist in residence program. Not for 6 months, maybe for about 2 or 3 years, because at one time we did have that. In fact, that's how I got here from the beginning.
Right.
And we just need more facilities that we can expand,
Okay.
because we definitely have the talent.
Excellent.
Yeah. You know, we need, I love the idea of a complex first and foremost, because what we want are outdoor spaces as well that allows for cross-fertilization to happen, that encourages that type of cross-fertilization, such that if we have a student outside practicing, a practice space or a space that you can turn into a practice space, then you're going to attract other folks to maybe who just come and listen. Dancers are always going to stretch where there's an open space, right? So then you're going to have a gathering of dancers there. Singers are going to find the best acoustics. So I'm not even going into the indoor spaces yet. I'm thinking about that complex, visualizing beautiful gathering spaces that, or spaces that students turn into gathering spaces, and then suddenly there's jams happening. Because I really am about turning the inside out. I like for art to happen out. In terms of the indoors, I can get very, particular. We need 4 dance studios. We have 1. We could service the entire college with the entire university when we're able to offer classes to non-majors. As you shared with your art appreciation course off, when we're able to invite the entire university into the arts, you are, first of all, inspiring artists. You're also creating audience. We need audience. We need audience. We need audience to fill our stadiums, our performance spaces. We need audiences to buy our art, to buy our music. So it is an exchange, and that often comes by being able to offer lots and lots of courses to non-majors. So we want enough space. We need studio spaces for, as Professor Phillips has articulated, for our students should all have their own studios for painting, sculpture studios. We need recording studios. We need larger band rooms for all of our bands so that we can grow our incredible Showtime band as well as our concert bands, as well as our choirs. There are students, the beauty of being here at Howard University is the extent to which how many students who aren't majors come in saying, I'm an artist, I'm in business, I want to take a class here, I want to take a dance class, I want to take an acting class, I want to take a music class, I want to continue painting, right? They want to continue their practice. And so we want to create enough space to be able to allow that, and then to open it up into the city. We should have galleries that are front-facing so that people can enter from the street, right? Yep. So, yes,
Excellent. Well, I don't think I could make a better pitch for when we go out to raise money for such a building, which hopefully we'll be doing very, very soon. As we close this conversation, I want to thank my guests for joining me as we explored how the arts inform socio-cultural engagement, how Howard has shaped the Black arts movement, and how the university continues to influence the future of diasporic artistic expression. I'm Dr. Wayne Frederick. Thanks for joining me on this episode of The Journey.
This program was produced by WHUT and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. For more information on this program or any other program, please visit our website at WHUT.org. Thank you.